Natalie, welcome to the Ability Podcast. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
So good to have you here on what feels like relatively short notice as well. And I think the urgency to kind of get awareness out there about the space you work in, right?
Yeah. It's been a bit wild.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. And even as an observer who works in the space but doesn't fully understand, music therapy and everything you do, I'm looking forward to learning a bit today and getting the word out there about what's going on other than just a click bite on the news, right?
Yeah.
So first off, Damo's a big apology last minute. He's had to be pulled away. So I thought we've got everything here, we've got you, and we want to get the word out there as quick as possible. So why not catch up with you and kind of learn about you and the space and the impact you're making in the NDIS. So I guess my first question is how'd you land into this work and what's the journey been for you?
Oh, well, I was always a muser. I always loved music as a kid. I knew I wanted to work in music. And I kind of got to year 12 and was like, do I want to actually go ahead and study a Bachelor of Music? And I ended up going into media and arts. Yep. So that was a conscious decision because I always had a real interest in journalism as well. So kind of took a little detour and became a journo, worked with ADC for a while as a rural reporter and in producing radio, and then went a bit into comms, and then was like, that little voice in my head was go back to music, just get it out of your system, go do a diploma at least, and just, So I went in, did my diploma in classical voice at the Elder Conservatorium, and got halfway through and was like, what am I doing here?
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that before. It's very different to enjoying music and then studying music can be quite intense, right?
Yeah. And I loved I felt so privileged to just be able to make music every day and experience just getting really good at the craft. Yeah. But I didn't want to be a performer. And I
Two different things, right? Two different things.
So different. I didn't want to be a teacher. Yeah. My dad was a teacher and I was like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
And I'd come across music therapy as an 18-year-old and was like, that's a long path.
Okay.
It's a
so
lot
you're
of
aware that it's like a long journey and it's like a whole thing. It's not just a small thing, it's a whole thing.
It's a bachelor degree and then a master's. So it's at least 5 years of study. Wow. And I was like, but then I had a look into it and I had all the prerequisites to get into the masters, and I was like, I'm gonna go for it. And I got in, which I was just so excited about.
Awesome.
And that's it. From there, I was a student music therapist, and then end of 2015 became a music therapist.
Cool. I always have respect for anyone who just not halfway through life, but through at some point in life decides to pivot and change jobs instead of just sticking in a thing. That takes guts.
Yeah, it's also privilege,
Yeah, and if you can,
I was in a position where I could.
You could, so It's fair to acknowledge, right?
Yeah.
So then from there, you finish your degree. At that point, is it out of uni, was it pretty clear that you knew, you're jumping straight into therapy? Is that how the degree works?
Yeah, so you become a music therapist, but you could work, in a hospital, in aged care, in mental health. But a lot of at that point in time, NDIS was still in its trial phase.
Yeah.
And so music therapist jobs were really far and few between, and they were super competitive. So there's a position at there's positions within SA Health, and there's just very few. There's quite a few positions in Melbourne because the course is there. So a lot of hospitals in Melbourne have music therapy positions. And the positions were often relatively part-time. So a lot of music therapists would kind of cobble together full-time work through doing a part-time job here, picking up a client or two there, running some contracted groups. So it was very bitsy. And in terms of being able to make a career for yourself, you had to be really resourceful.
And the NDIS wasn't fully going yet.
Yeah, it was in its trial phase.
Trial phase.
And at that stage, it was quite easy to become registered. It was basically a form.
Okay.
So filled in form.
Yeah.
And in my second year out, I started seeing clients privately, participants in the scheme. And it just kind of snowballed from there. Yeah.
Cool. Do you want to jump straight into that and talk about the difference between what it means to be registered as a therapist and the difference between the people that are out there not registered, and kind of because and I'm really curious around all that. Fran, we chatted beforehand as well, and we haven't gone into it yet. But even just the difference between like music and like with a support worker and somebody doing that, and actually the difference between what you're achieving and what you're doing. And I think there's probably like a level of ignorance or misunderstanding in even the sector. I think because other service providers that might want to utilize you are really busy, and they're like, I'm just not educated on what all the other providers are doing or know how to refer. So is there a fair bit of like inconsistency, would you say, in the space?
Yes. And I would say what it comes down to is the fact that prior to NDIS, the Australian Music Therapy Association, our peak body.
Yep. Like a physio would have like a GP, like an occupational therapist, or a peak body.
Like speech pathologists, SPA, Speech Pathology Australia.
Yeah.
For us, it's Australian Music Therapy Association.
Yeah.
Prior to NDIS, the membership was small, like let's say 400.
Yeah, right.
And over the last 9 or so years, the profession's grown because NDIS has provided work opportunities for registered music therapists.
I'm with you.
And so the AMTA probably hasn't had the resources and the funding to really get out there what it is that music therapists do.
Right. It's been kind of maybe a bit reactive to how much everything's grown.
Yeah.
For sure.
And so in the last few years, like our membership fees have gone up quite considerably, but they've also been able to employ advocacy officers, comms people, whereas previously it was completely volunteer run. And so our music therapy has been professionalized for the last 50 years, but it's really come into its own in probably the last 10, where it's been able to be, I guess, advertised as a therapeutic service, just like any other allied health service. So I guess that's sort of the backstory. And then just to answer your question about, a support worker doing music. So the current qualification you need to have to become registered with the Australian Music Therapy Association is a Master's in Music Therapy.
5 years, Masters,
Well, 2 years Masters, and then you would have done your undergrad prior to that. You're expected to have had some sort of psychology units within your undergrad. And within the Masters of Music Therapy, you're looking at, how to counsel someone, but specifically how music itself is a therapeutic tool and how it can be used in so many diverse ways. Understanding how it interacts with the body, our brains, our emotions, physiological responses, how to take that and apply it in a therapeutic setting to get an outcome for someone.
It's pretty wild when you think about music, even just like broadly. It is like something that has been with us for forever. Like as soon as humans were like cruising around, we were pretty much singing, right? And it's like one of our basic things. Like any ancient civilization that you look back on, there was always some component of like, whether it was connected to a religious thing or a sacred tradition, music was attached to it. It's kind of wild when you start deep diving into like, I guess, how powerful music and what it kind of can create.
It's social.
So, it's totally
connection.
social. Yeah.
And that's kind of the magic of it.
Yeah,
because
for
like
sure.
I don't like to use magic as a therapist.
No.
Sounds a bit
but
woo,
it is kind of wild. it is pretty magical. So in that sense, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
So if someone can't communicate verbally, being able to express themselves on a drum or just having the experience of communicating or connecting with someone musically is it just opens up a world.
Yeah.
Athenian Living doesn't just provide somewhere to live, they provide somewhere to grow, thrive and belong. Click the link to speak with a member of the team to see if you're qualified for specialised disability accommodation or to book a tour through one of their homes.
What is some of the, I guess, the good news stories or also like the evidence-based outcomes that you see in your work that would differ from a support worker who likes just like teaching people, some shredding with some dude? Do you know what I mean? Like, which has, I mean,
that has its place.
Has its place as like just an observer, just like taking someone to the cricket or teaching someone a bit of footy on a shift and having a chat that's not counselling, but having, mentoring and hanging out has a place. Different things have.
But you wouldn't call
skill.
it speech therapy.
No,
so,
exactly. Yeah,
and that's the difference, right?
Yeah.
So if you're making music with someone and, I guess
And that's the misconception, right? And
if you're a support worker, there's always that dialogue, like, you know, are you a support worker or are you a friend?
Yeah.
You know, are you there in a professional role? And that sometimes I think that role can kind of get a little bit mixed and misconstrued.
Yeah, big time.
And a support worker might say, hey, like, I can do music therapy with you because I can play the guitar or I can teach an instrument. And it's very likely that they don't understand what that means.
Yeah, for sure.
But unfortunately, we don't, like the Australian Music Therapy Association has looked at this and they don't have, like, legally to try and say music therapy as a term is protected for the use of registered music therapists.
Yeah.
And this is a whole other can of worms
sure,
because this is kind of how we've gotten into this space with the
100%.
NDIS now, where there's all of this
and I think
sort of drama.
I mean, we saw Bill Shorten a little while back on the news talking about it, and I think just doing felt like he was doing a poor job of trying to explain himself, even with just like getting the pricing wrong and kind of brushing over things a little bit. Yeah.
And I felt sorry for him because, like, I mean, half the time they're doing what their advisors have told them to do, ministers.
Yeah,
I mean, and they can only do what's based on the information put in front of them.
Yeah.
And what kind of became apparent when the Australian Music Therapy Association met with Minister Shorten was that the issue was way more complicated than he thought it was.
Okay, so was that meeting like before things had started to be announced? Or
I've got a
after,
timeline.
Okay. And all right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so there's a bit of an ongoing dialogue.
Yes. And so where we're at now is that there is a review into an independent review by a health economist called Dr. Stephen Duckett. Who's going to be looking at the evidence base for music and art therapy.
You should repeat that name again.
Dr. Stephen Duckett.
Cool. And what does he do?
He's a health economist.
Health economist. Okay.
Yeah. And he's he's an independent person outside of the NDIA who's going to review all the evidence and then report back about whether or not there is enough evidence that music therapy supports functional capacity, improvement in functional capacity.
Which I'd love to get enough time to dive into a few examples of that.
Yeah.
But do you think he's the right person for the job, or is that the wrong? I mean, having one person assigned, it seems like quite a tricky task for any one person to be kind of diving into.
And it's massive. Like, it's not just music therapy.
You're affecting the whole industry.
Therapy.
Yeah.
And I guess the tricky thing around this is we need to be really respectful of the process.
Yeah.
But when the AMTA actually went and met with Minister Shorten, they were prepared with some terms of reference for an independent review.
Yeah.
And they actually said, look, if you do need to do an independent review into this, we'd really like it to be a panel and we'd like some women on the panel.
Okay.
Because music therapy is predominantly female workforce.
And that was the feedback from AMTA?
Yeah.
Said that? The Australian Music Therapy Association said they wanted a review with a panel.
Yeah.
With a diverse group of people from.
And they came back, I think, 9 or so days later and said, this is what we're going to do.
Okay. And this one guy's going to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
As an observer who knows nothing, I find that interesting.
It is. But, you know, I've had a look at what Dr. Duckett's done in the past. And progressive guy. He's looked at some, you know, things on the PBS and made some, I feel, really good decisions in that.
Sweet.
And
as you said, you just want to see how the process plays out, right?
I'm confident he'll make a fair, I guess, decision.
Yeah.
On the evidence that's presented to him.
And for those listening today who are involved in the NDIS, people like me who are invested and love working in this space and love seeing that this is something, you know, unique, and it's the corruption and the misuse of funds have deeply frustrated me and many people, but seeing that we're trying to set almost an example on the world stage of how disabilities can be approached. What is the, you know, a lot of us have misconceptions around what you do. Do you want to kind of clarify some examples between, like, even just some good news stories around how your science-based work has kind of led to outcomes for people that couldn't be achieved otherwise? Yeah.
So I'll give an example. So for example, if I were working with a stroke survivor, I would do sort of like a pre-test to kind of see maybe what their gait or what their walking was like, for example.
Yep.
And then I would use a technique called RAS, which is rhythmic auditory stimulation. And the idea behind that is that when we're listening to music, you like naturally want to entrain to the beat. So that's like you're walking past the shops and you naturally sync in with the music, right?
For sure. It's me on the way to work with a coffee, just trying to get the beats going.
So as a registered music therapist, I understand sort of like the neurology behind that, why that occurs. And trained in this technique where I sort of match that person's walking pace. So it might be unsteady. So I'm going to measure sort of the unsteadiness of it, the number of steps they're going to take in a number of minutes. And then I will match that person and use music in a way to try and encourage them to walk in a steadier way using the music and using the beat, right?
Is that a pretty studied example?
Yeah,
like that one
this is
itself?
like clinical,
it's
a clinical intervention.
So,
right?
Cool.
I
don't mean that in a condescending way. I mean that more in like, has there been like multiple
trials
and stuff on this stuff? That's cool.
So then this is a neurologic music therapy technique. There's 20 standardized techniques that a lot of music therapists are trained in, not all. And so this is a technique that I might use to help someone improve their steadiness of their walk and the speed of their walk. And then I'll take a test at the end to understand if it's worked. And so that, for example, paired in rehabilitation. So if they're working with a physio, they might have gotten to a certain point with the physio and then they're like, hey, let's bring in the music therapist. And the music therapist might be able to speed up the process of that person being able to have a more steady gait.
Wow.
So
that's really cool.
It's science.
And not like, I would not even know to refer anyone to your services that's working in partnership with a physio or with a speechy, or just even someone, as many of our clients are not mainstream people who have the confidence or independence to just access services with ease, to be able to know that your service could support in that.
At Perfect Motion Physiotherapy, we believe that healing goes beyond treatment. It's about rediscovering the joy of movement.
Are you ready to take the next step towards renewed movement and well-being? Click the link in the description below to find out more and book a consultation with their team.
It's also good for we actually see a lot of people with psychosocial disability who they don't want to see a therapist.
For sure.
But they're quite happy to sit down with one of us and, have a chat about their favorite music and have a go at playing guitar. And so when we're talking about building functional capacity in that situation, we're encouraging that person to build the social skills potentially, to build the confidence, to be able to have that interaction. And then our goal isn't to keep seeing them into perpetuity, to funnel them into mainstream music lessons or a community group or whatever it is.
Cool. So that's some of the counselling type skills that you would use with somebody with psychosocial, for example. Yeah, cool. Yeah. Awesome. Those are awesome examples. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Just trying to think, what now? What do you want to talk about now? That's really, that definitely for me, summarizes just some examples that I wouldn't think of.
If we go back to sort of what you were saying before about the fraud in the system.
Yeah.
So let me go back to the meeting with Minister Shorten. Yes. So our association has been incredible. Our president, Monica Zaidar, is just a powerhouse, right? Cool. And they are such good communicators with us. So everything that's happened, they've been really open and transparent and told us everything that's been said. And so one thing that became really apparent in the meeting with Minister Shorten was that some of the evidence that might have been reviewed, which led to the NDIA to originally make the decision to remove music therapy from therapy supports, might have been because lots of people are claiming on the music therapy line item that aren't music therapists.
Yeah, that would certainly add to the confusion. And I know of one business, for example, that's now closed, that was billing huge amounts of services under capacity building, and they were not registered to do so, and they weren't therapists. Yeah, so people were getting away with doing, I don't know now, but I know that business wasn't. They've shut now. So yeah. So people were billing under the line item that music
that was
therapy,
reserved for someone registered with the Australian Music Therapy Association. Yeah. And so kind of the way this kind of came about was because the minister or someone in this meeting said, oh, there's like 1,000 music therapists who are billing under this line item. That there was some data presented. There's only 950 music therapists in Australia currently, and 650 work within the NDIS.
Right.
So there were a huge number of people
so like,
billing.
Holy shit.
Yeah, so individual providers.
That's a massive problem.
Yeah.
Like that's like almost half of the people. So it's like 400 people were just billing under
that weren't registered
and was saying they were music therapists. Wow.
And so when
really part of that problem falls back on the NDIS and not on you.
I mean, in this meeting, they said, well, you need to regulate it more. You need to make sure these people aren't calling themselves music therapists and using the line item. But we can't control how people are billing. So really that's
Correct.
An NDIA problem.
Correct.
Because they need to, I guess, better regulate the way they are paying people and making sure that they're paying the right
Has this been resolved yet? This
No.
issue? No. So if somebody was out there today listening to this and going, I really want to refer someone to a music therapist, what should they be asking, or when they Google or find someone or get in touch with your services of creative therapy, like what should they be checking for? Because you're basically telling me almost half the people out there aren't even music therapists and can't help you clinically, like with those evidence
they don't have the clinical training
to work on gait movement, for example. So what should people be asking?
For their Australian Music Therapy Association registration number.
Cool. And if that's too hard for them, find someone else.
Yeah, well, if they can't present it, then
they
not
don't have
registered,
to
I
have
guess.
it. Yeah.
Because if you ask a music therapist who's registered, oh, what's your number? They will proudly be like,
of course.
Here it is.
I see it in the little like in your email. Sometimes some people put it in their email.
Yeah.
Their registration details. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Wow. That's pretty mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So what is the hope for your therapy in the NDIS? What is the outcome you're hoping for? How can the public and those who are positively impacted by these services support what you're doing?
Well, we have quite a big client base who understandably were really stressed about this situation. And we're still having people ask us like, because there's also the dialogue around, you can't misuse your funds. There's a lot of stress and fear around that at the moment as well. So we're having a lot of people come say to us, are you sure? Are you sure it's still covered? So for the time being, it is until the result of Dr. Duckett's review.
Okay. Which is, do you know
So the terms of reference say that, they recommend that his report is completed by the 14th of March.
True.
So, fingers crossed. We're all. I look lighthearted, but we are so stressed.
Yeah, of course.
Because it's
our entire industry, it's your
it's
career. You spent 5 years.
650 music therapists in Australia. Yeah. And a lot of us are either sole traders or we run businesses. Like we employ 10 people. So it's a really big deal when this outcome gets handed down for us. And it will impact people's ability to access music therapy, unfortunately, because let's say it doesn't work in our favour and, we can't make the business continue to be sustainable financially. That just means that, we'll just go work in other areas. I might go back to being a journalist. Who knows? So it's really sad because NDIS participants and other people will miss out.
And the hope would be that it would be regulated and invoices would be go through proper channels better, and that ultimately it would be a part of identified as appropriate treatment for people with a disability, right?
Yeah, I mean it would all be fixed if I guess it was checked. Who's getting paid on that line item?
100%. Yeah.
And a bit more is going into that now. So plan managers have really cottoned on and they're asking for it, and the good ones always were. Yeah. But as the scheme's a little bit of a
learning curve.
All over the shop.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Wow. That's really helpful. It's certainly helpful understanding, like, I guess some of the feedback Bill Shorten's received as well around like how much is being invoiced for it, and then you look at the reality of, well, that actually wasn't all done by music therapists.
And I guess that's where the dialogue of the fraud and all that comes into play. Yeah. But it's almost like because of that fraud, music therapists are being demonized.
Yes.
When really, like, we were just doing our thing.
Yes.
We were providing, most of us, incredible services to
Yeah.
NDIS participants that were really helping.
Yeah.
And
Is a lot of what you do gait work, or is it then also other work that's just completely different and in
very broad?
Yeah, so a lot of stuff that intertwines with like speech therapists as well. Speech. He's often called them speechies, but it's actually a speech pathologist.
Speech pathologist. Yeah,
cool.
So we have our clinic provides speech therapy and music therapy.
Oh, cool. So you'll
And we work really closely with the speech pathologists. And so there's this other technique, neurologic music therapy technique called DSLM, developmental speech and language through music. And it's basically utilizing all of the different areas of the brain, right, light up when you listen to music. So if you're trying to teach someone to speak but cannot speak, you're going to go by other channels. So you're going to try and use rhythm, which is processed in a different part of the brain, melody, which is processed in a different part of the brain, to try and help that person to learn to speak. Because
so you're saying music lights up a lot of the brain?
Yeah. Brain scans, it's like, woo, like all over.
Whereas like if we're having a conversation, or if you're just doing like a mundane task like fixing a printer, it's like a small part of the brain is activated. But you're saying when music is kind of fully
I think
happening.
If you're fixing a printer, like definitely angry parts of your brain.
Yeah, definitely. I can totally. That's my brain. during a printer, it's like, damn it, I've got things to do. It's just so annoying.
Beyond Plan managers don't just take charge of your NDIS plan, they empower you to take charge of your journey.
Their expert team is dedicated to seeing your NDIS plan unlock its full potential and seeing you thrive.
But all right, so here's an example, right?
Yeah.
So if I sing Twinkle, twinkle, little
star.
There you go, right? And so your language part of your brain was like, sing star.
Yeah.
But then also you've got like the part of your brain that's processing the melody going, complete the phrase, complete the phrase.
Sure, okay, totally.
And you even did it on cue.
Yeah.
So there would have been another part of your brain as well that was going like, be in time.
Yeah.
So we're utilizing all those different elements to try and elicit language.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
That's super exciting.
Yeah.
It's really nice to deep dive into it, because I think also part of the barrier just to the general public, and even myself as someone in the sector, our space is so, it's just such like a jigsaw puzzle of things coming together. And often it's just like, how does this work in with this client? And how does this service or this part work into it? And why is this funded? And why is this not funded? And trying to understand like how to get that income for our people, our outcome, for our people. Because people on the NDIS scheme, the statistics are really clear on how much they've been marginalised and vulnerable to abuse.
And not able to make their own decisions.
And not able to make their own decisions is the big one, right?
Yeah.
So, it's just really nice to get more information out there. Yeah, so you work closely with a speechy on this sort of stuff.
Yeah, we've got 3 speeches on our team.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Cool. Awesome.
So there's a lot of interplay. Like I can talk all day. So we have a team of music therapists, team speechies, but we are really involved often in people's care teams.
Yeah.
So we'll talk to the OT and be like, hey, like how are you approaching this sensory sensitivity? And so then through having those conversations, we might be able to reduce that sensory sensitivity through a musical activity, say if it was an auditory sensitivity. So there's like so much interplay, so much intersect. Like I said before, we work with a physio, for example. So if someone was working on like upper limb movement, maybe they have a set of repetitive exercises. Our goal would be to increase that person's, motivation to participate in that activity so that they'll do their exercises. And we might put together a list of music, which is at the right beats per minute, so that they can do those exercises and want to do it because they're motivated to do it to the music.
Yeah, that's wild.
So we can come in and do like all that consultation and stuff as well to try and help progress people in different ways. Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have heaps more questions. I feel like you've really explained music therapy to me in like a big way. I think probably most importantly, the thing we really want to get down to today is like what music recommendations you have for our audience.
Oh.
You said you were a music fan before you got into all this. Anything like what's your go-to like good vibe songs? Come on.
Coldplay,
yeah, sweet.
I feel like
Not on the Tay Tay train?
Oh,
No, Coldplay.
I
Okay.
mean, I really respect her and I respect her songwriting.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
of course.
So I loved Coldplay, like when they brought out
That-
Parachutes.
yeah,
like
cool.
Yellow.
Yeah,
Loved
all the
Yellow.
old, yeah, all the classics. Love that.
And this is a really interesting fact. So the music that you love pretty much throughout your whole life is the music that you usually interacted with as a teenager.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it brings back those memories, those
Yeah.
feelings of like, you have such strong feelings as a teenager. You often associate it with music.
Yeah.
So yeah, I still like Coldplay,
Yeah.
Folds 5,
Yeah.
Missy Higgins.
Yeah.
you know, like-
Sweet. all those good things. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
How about you? What do you like?
Look, anything hip hop from the 90s is pretty,
yes.
I usually wind my windows up. You got to be careful. Some of the language is quite
do these
explicit.
days,
yeah. But that and Metallica, I would
Nice.
say, all my two, like, let's go.
You go
Let's
to.
get excited as a youngster.
Yeah.
Any take-home thoughts you want to discuss with the audience abroad, with other providers, clients, family members, any sort of take-home message for them regarding your services?
I guess like what it all comes down to is that music therapists just want parity with other allied health professions. Like we're really
For
being
sure.
marginalized and
Yeah.
segmented out, and we're not being included in the evidence advisory committee, which
Okay.
is going to happen
Yep.
from July across all therapy supports. So that there was never an intention to include music therapists in that.
Okay.
And the fact we've got this independent review has been, part of the advocacy of not just our association, but we had so many participants raise their voices for this. We've got a petition of 60,000 signatures. So I guess what it comes down to is if the community wants this, they need to make it known.
And how would we go about following pages, links, or anything in this next day? People are more interested to learn more about what you're sharing.
So until the 7th of February, Dr. Ducker is taking some submissions from anyone. So if you've had an experience with music therapy or you have a family member that has and you would like to make a submission.
Cool. Put the link in this.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yes. Sign the petition, share on social media. And just those words of support as well to our participants to say like, we're here for you as long as we can be.
Yeah, doing your thing. Thank you so much, Natalie, for sharing your passion for music and ultimately your passion for people in the NDIS. Thanks for your time.
Thanks.
Peace.